President Yoon meets with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts in San Francisco, agreeing to consolidate their three-way cooperation in various fields. And during an APEC session, the president focused on carbon-free energy and a smart mobility initiative. The IMF forecasts South Korea's inflation to slow down to its target of the 2% range by the end of next year, but for this year, inflationary pressure could remain high due to oil prices. Curtains up for the grand opening of the biggest game festival in Korea, G-Star in the city of Busan. The key word for 2023, variety in genres and platforms. It's November 17th, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. We start in San Francisco, where world leaders gather for their common economic interests within the APEC framework. There, South Korean President Yoon met his U.S. and Japanese counterparts, agreeing to consolidate their three-way cooperation. Our senior presidential office correspondent Woo Soo-young reports.
The leaders of South Korea, the United States and Japan stood shoulder to shoulder in San Francisco, demonstrating their confidence in their trilateral cooperation, with Seoul and Tokyo's bilateral channels 100% restored, according to President Yoon Suk-yeol. Yoon on Thursday briefly met President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, while posing together for a standalone photo session. That marked the first time the leaders met in person in 3 months since their Camp David summit in August. A Seoul presidential official told reporters that the leaders held private talks for about 10 minutes, sharing optimism on the progress of their trilateral cooperation. Yoon and Biden also held a separate conversation discussing their domestic politics, economies and employment conditions.
The frequent gathering of the three leaders reinforced the spirit of their Camp David agreements, which aim to bolster the rules-based international order and together enhance regional security and prosperity based on their shared values of freedom, human rights and rule of law.
The three leaders held a similar impromptu meeting during the G7 Hiroshima summit in May, after the Korean and Japanese leaders had restored their so-called shuttle exchange of visits to Seoul and Tokyo to improve bilateral ties over long-standing historical issues, including Japan's wartime forced labor and sexual enslavement of Koreans. On Thursday, Yoon and Kishida held a separate summit in San Francisco for about 35 minutes, agreeing to further enhance their bilateral exchanges between youth and cooperation on global issues such as North Korea's security threat, the war in Ukraine, and the development of the global south.
올해 정상을 비롯한 각계 각급에서 교류가 활성화되고 정부 간 협의체가 복원돼서 양국 간 협력이 심화되고 있습니다. 상반기 안보정책협의회 경제안보 대화에 이어서 지난달 외교 차관 전략 대화까지 재개되면서 지난 3월 방일시 합의한 모든 정부 간 협의체가 이제 100% 복원이 됐습니다.
Noting they had met for the 7th time this year, Prime Minister Kishida said he felt reassured that Seoul and Tokyo were working closely together amid the rapidly changing geopolitical dynamics.
We have been initiating bilateral cooperation in diverse fields, including political relations, security, economy and culture. I hope to further develop this course of cooperation.
As the geopolitical rivalry between the US and China raises concern in the Indo-Pacific, South Korea has been aiming to revive a trilateral summit with Japan and China within the year to promote regional peace and cooperation. A Yoon official said a separate bilateral meeting at APEC between Yoon and Xi Jinping has not been confirmed, but is under discussion, after the two leaders held a brief conversation of about 3 to 4 minutes on Thursday, meeting for the first time in person since the G20 summit in Indonesia last year. Woo Soo-young, Arirang News, San Francisco.
In the meantime, President Yoon made a speech during the first session of the APEC, emphasizing South Korea's role in the global battle against climate change. He also met with 13 other leaders in IPEF, with the group closing in on completing the 2 more pillars of the initiative for clean energy and anti-corruption. Correspondent Kim Do-yeon has more.
South Korea is looking to further contribute to global efforts to tackle climate change. President Yoon, speaking at the APEC summit on Thursday, proposed a smart mobility initiative with South Korea in charge.
President Yoon proposed a special initiative among APEC members to spread smart mobility such as eco-friendly cars and autonomous vehicles. What this would mean for South Korea is sharing our smart mobility knowledge and experience, which would allow our companies to expand into other overseas markets, as well as help our own economy.
He also mentioned that APEC's climate center is located in South Korea's second largest city, Busan, and that South Korea could utilize this to take the lead. He also said that South Korea is capable of contributing to reducing greenhouse gases emitted from maritime transportation. Meanwhile, on the sidelines of APEC, President Yoon also attended the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. This U.S.-led group with 14 members announced an agreement had been reached on 2 more pillars of the initiative, covering cooperation on clean energy and anti-corruption measures, with the supply chain pillar already being done. The last one, which is yet to be formally agreed on, refers to trade matters.
We still have more work to do, but we've made substantial progress. In record time, we've reached consensus on 3 of the pillars of the IPEF.
The members at this summit also agreed to create the IPEF network, a means of working together on people-to-people exchanges, and this was suggested by South Korea. And also on the sidelines, President Yoon met with his Vietnamese counterpart Vo Van Tong. This 15-minute meeting came after Yoon's state visit to Vietnam in June, with the two promising to continue building on from that meeting. He also met with his Chilean counterpart Gabriel Boric for the first time. They agreed to strengthen cooperation as this year marks the 20th anniversary of South Korea and Chile's free trade agreement. According to the top office, Yoon also noted to these two leaders about his concerns over arms exchanges between North Korea and Russia, as it is a global security threat and an unlawful way to distract global order. 김도현, Arirang News.
Shifting gears, the IMF forecasts South Korea's inflation to slow down to its target of the 2% range by the end of next year. But for this year, inflationary pressure could remain high due to oil prices. This could mean interest rates stay higher for the time being to curb prices. Moon Hae-ryun reports.
The International Monetary Fund's latest report has predicted that the country will reach its 2% inflation target by the end of next year. Following an annual meeting between the IMF and South Korea's Finance Ministry, Central Bank and other institutions back in September, a report detailing the agency's economic outlook as well as policy guidelines was released on Friday. Its economic growth outlook for this year is in line with the Bank of Korea's forecast of 1.4%, as the economy is expected to make a gradual recovery thanks to rising semiconductor exports and increased tourism. The country logged a rise in memory chip exports for the first time in 16 months in October. As for the IMF's growth projection for 2024, it maintained its forecast of 2.2% from October, down 0.2 percentage points from its forecast in July due to the continued slowdown in the manufacturing sector. Meanwhile, inflation is expected to keep slowing, reaching 3.6% this year and 2.4% next year, before reaching the country's inflation target of 2% by the end of 2024. This is a hike of 0.2 percentage points for 2023 and 0.1 percentage points for 2024 from its forecast in October. The IMF recommended keeping interest rates high for a considerable period in order to stabilize prices. It also evaluated South Korea's current monetary policy as being appropriate, as the BOK kept its benchmark interest rate unchanged last month. The country's foreign exchange reserves were analyzed as being sufficiently capable of responding to external shocks. Another policy recommendation made was the need for structural reforms to the labor market to provide more flexibility in Korea's labor market and narrow the gender gap in the workforce. With South Korea's aging population, the IMF said that pension reforms were needed to address high elderly poverty rates and maintain fiscal soundness. Bolder policies to respond to climate change were also cited as being needed in order to meet the government's greenhouse gas reduction goal for 2030. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Prosecutors in South Korea have demanded a 5-year prison sentence for Samsung Electronics executive chairman Lee Jae-yong, who is on trial for alleged accounting fraud and several violations of the law on capital markets. During the final hearing on Friday, they also requested a fine of 500 million Korean won, or around $385,000. In 2020, Lee was indicted on charges of manipulating stock prices in the 2015 merger of two Samsung affiliates, Samsung C&T and Cheil Industries. There have been accusations that Samsung Group management may have intentionally lowered the value of Samsung C&T to help Lee gain control of the company, as he was the largest shareholder of Cheil Industries. Prosecutors say this manipulation caused losses for other investors and hold Lee responsible for these. He also stands accused of involvement in the suspected accounting fraud at Samsung Biologics, a subsidiary of Cheil Industries. In the Middle East, Israeli military officials say they have made more disturbing discoveries at Gaza's largest medical center, backing up their claims that Hamas is using the hospital as a command center. Lee Soo-jin with details.
The Israel Defense Forces has said that it has found the body of an Israeli hostage in a tunnel shaft at the Al-Shifa hospital complex in Gaza City. According to the IDF on Thursday local time, the Israeli military discovered the body of Yudit Weiss in a structure near Al-Shifa hospital.
The body of Judith, may her soul rest in peace, was recovered by our forces, the 7th Brigade, which was scanning the area by the Al-Shifa hospital. We recovered her body in one of the homes during the scanning. Near her body, we found bodies of terrorists who were holding Judith.
The 65-year-old woman was kidnapped by Hamas militants during the raid on southern Israel on October 7, when at least 1,200 people were killed and more than 200 were abducted. Her husband was also killed in the Hamas attack. The IDF also said that it had uncovered an entrance to a Hamas tunnel at the hospital, revealing videos and photographs of the tunnel shaft and weapons. It also said that a Hamas pickup truck similar to those used in the October 7 attacks was discovered carrying weapons near the tunnel entrance. This comes after Israeli troops raided the hospital Wednesday morning, searching the buildings and interrogating some people there. They say that Hamas has a military command center underneath the hospital. Israel's defense minister also supported this claim, saying the IDF's recent findings signal that there is significant underground infrastructure in the area.
I arrived today at the headquarters of the division, whose special forces also operate inside Al-Shifa hospital. There are significant findings there. The operation continues, and it is done in a precise, selective, but very, very determined manner.
He did not specify what the significant findings were. The defense minister added that the IDF has taken control of the western part of Gaza City and that the army has now moved on to the next phase of its ground operation. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea and the U.S. have signed an arrangement to bolster their defense supply chains. This would allow the two sides to request priority delivery of defense-related goods from one another. Seoul's Defense Acquisition Program Administration and the U.S. Department of Defense officially signed the bilateral security of supply arrangement on Thursday. South Korea is expected to receive U.S. defense resources preferentially, benefiting from a timely deployment of defense resources. The Pentagon also said the arrangement is another important step forward in the 7-decade defense relationship between Seoul and Washington. This week, we are delivering the stories of politicians of Korean descent who gathered together here in Seoul for this year's Global Korean Politicians Forum. In part 2 of our series, our political correspondent Lee Si-hoo sat down with Senator Yonah Martin of Canada, who talked about her devoted love for her home country.
Senator Yonah Martin is the first Canadian of Korean descent to serve in Canada's Senate. Born in Seoul, Martin immigrated to Canada in 1972. She was an educator for 21 years. Her involvement in co-founding the C3 Korean Canadian Society was what led her into politics.
So this C3 Society was a nonprofit group. We try to bridge communities, so have people who are not Korean experience Korean culture in Canada, be a part of a really wonderful society.
For Martin, politics was a real sense of calling.
I felt it like almost in a mysterious way, but a real sense that I had to just step forward and do the work that I needed to do as a Canadian of Korean descent.
Since her appointment, Senator Martin has worked on many Korea-related issues. She's authored the Korean War Veterans Day Act, respecting a national day of remembrance to honor them. She's also co-led the Canada-Korea Interparliamentary Group since 2009.
So I'm the co-chair, and actually a few days ago I met with my counterparts in the National Assembly, and so we do this very important exchange and partnering work to really deepen our relations with Canada and Korea.
For Senator Martin, her home country is a source of pride.
So I hope that the Koreans themselves living in this country, now I hope Koreans never ever forget the history of Korea, the incredible history of resilience, of just pain and trials, but also triumph, and that the South Korea of today is a real source of pride for people like me and others around the world.
And she thinks about the trials and triumphs of her ancestors during her work.
Sometimes I feel a bit, tense or scared, but I think about what's in my veins, the blood of my ancestors, my parents, the survivors, and I feel incredible strength because of that.
이시후, 아리랑 뉴스.
The League of Legends World Championship, a big event for many esports fans, returned to South Korea after 5 years. The finals are taking place this weekend, during which the top two teams, one from Korea and the other from China, will face each other. Our Ian, he brings highlights of the media day.
The 2023 League of Legends World Championship Finals Media Day took place on November 15th in Seoul, ahead of the weekend's finals. Out of the 22 teams from 9 regions that competed, the top 2 teams to face each other are T1 from the Korean League and Weibo Gaming from the Chinese League. T1 player Lee Sang-hyuk is known as Faker and is also recognized as the League of Legends greatest of all time since his debut 10 years ago.
I tend to not like losing, and that makes it even more fun to compete with such great players. And in doing so, I also think that working to develop myself is very meaningful, and that is why I try my best.
According to the global head of League of Legends esports, Naz Aletaha, T1 is arguably one of, if not the most popular teams in the world, based on Faker's legacy alone. Adding that Faker is going for his 4th world champion title and can do that in front of a home crowd is something that's been reflected in the excitement in the community. However, T1 will face strong competition in the final with Weibo Gaming.
Our team has grown, and just like our coach's instructions, we have learned to play together. I believe that allows me to feel even better when we win games.
League of Legends is one of the most popular global esports competitions, and the League of Legends World Championship, also known as Worlds, is the pinnacle of the global tournament organized by Riot Games every year.
I truly believe that esports would not be the global phenomenon that it is if it weren't for the players and the fans here in Korea, so we are grateful. We believe esports are core to our ability to deliver exceptional experiences to our players, and it's why Riot is committed to honoring the excitement and the fandom of esports around the world.
The finals will also feature Riot's new virtual pop group, Heartsteel, with EXO group member Baekhyun among those providing his voice for the group. K-pop girl group New Jeans will also appear with a performance of this year's theme song, Gods.
It was nothing like we've ever done before. And we're like, you know what? Are we going to be able to do this? We can do this. I think it came out really well in the theme song, and we're going to be performing it live soon, which is crazy.
New Jeans and Heartsteel will kick off the opening ceremony of the League of Legends Grand Final on November 19th. Yoon Hee, Arirang News.
Time for our weekly arts and culture segment. We have our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin in the studio. Welcome, Yoo-jin.
Happy Friday, Jungmin.
Happy Friday. What do you have for us today?
Well, Jungmin, it's been a really exciting week here on the cultural front in Korea. As you just saw from Uni's report, the 2023 League of Legends World Championship Finals is going to take place right here in Seoul on Sunday. But just before that, Korea's biggest game festival just kicked off. That's right. For those who know, the 2023 G-Star started its 4-day run yesterday. So I've just returned from Busan, where I got a sneak peek at what this year's G-Star has in store. So let's first take a look.
Games have been making headlines in South Korea this year, with athletes securing gold at the inaugural esports events at the Hangzhou Asian Games and the return of the League of Legends World Championship for the first time in 5 years. Now, the spotlight shifts to G-Star, Korea's biggest game fair that's held annually in the southern port city of Busan.
So this year's G-Star is the biggest edition yet, with more than 1,000 game companies running more than 3,300 booths across 4 days. It's a gaming extravaganza like never before.
A third-quarter downturn in sales for most domestic game companies was attributed to a lack of variety of genres and platforms. So participants have responded by diversifying their game lineups. Notably, Korean gaming giant NCSoft is making a comeback to G-Star after an 8-year hiatus, unveiling 7 new games, the most among all participants.
We've got this shooting game called LLL, a collection game called BSS, and Battle Crush, which enables cross-play on the Nintendo Switch, mobile and PC. Our goal at G-Star is to engage with users by showing them what we've got.
Another heavyweight, Smilegate, is making its return after 9 years with the mobile version of its PC game Lost Ark, with plans to transform the game into a multi-platform one. Regular participant Netmarble is introducing 3 new games, each with different genres: action-adventure, subculture, and science fiction. The one garnering the most attention is the action-adventure themed 7 Deadly Sins Origin.
Last year, we unveiled the game's trailer at G-Star, and since then, we've received a lot of positive feedback from fans. Today, we finally have the opportunity to roll out our game to users.
Offering a wider variety of games, the venue was bustling with game enthusiasts from day one.
Last year has a smaller booth, but it's much bigger this year, so I want to try out new games as well.
It's very impressive, lots of huge displays, lots of interesting cosplayers that I've been seeing, so it surpassed my expectations.
So if you're curious about the latest games, G-Star is where they are.
A wider variety of games, more to enjoy.
Right.
Yoo-jin, you also covered G-Star last year. Anything different or special about this year's edition?
Well, there definitely was. First of all, I could see that there were more people when compared to last year on the first day. Last year, I also went to cover G-Star on the event's first day as well, and also program-wise. For the first time, G-Star introduced the so-called Subculture Festival running alongside the main exhibition. So for those who may not know, subculture is an emerging game genre that resembles Japanese animations, and the festival offers visitors a chance to try out cosplay, explore a subculture the merchandise market, and various on-stage and outdoor events. And I also want to mention the Korea Game Awards that took place one day before G-Star. Last year, a game I highlighted in my G-Star report, Lies of P, actually won the grand prize. So it's really incredible to witness how a new game can evolve into something really substantial within a year.
Guess you have a good eye. And you mentioned how it's not just about Busan, but it's a big week for game industries here in Korea. What's ahead?
You're right. So ahead of the League of Legends World Finals on Sunday, Seoul City is actually running a game sports culture festival until Sunday. So on Saturday, you'll be able to enjoy a game-themed concert that will take place at the Gwanghwamun Square in central Seoul. So at this concert, singers like Alan Walker, Nikki Taylor, and Idol from Korea, who've collaborated with League of Legends, Legends will be taking the stage. And on Sunday, which is the big day, you can catch the League of Legends finals live on a big screen at Gwanghwamun Square, since all seats at the venue, Gocheok Skydome, are sold out. And our reporter Yoon will be covering the highly anticipated League of Legends finals, so please stay tuned for that too.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Yujin.
Thank you.
This cold wave is forecast to stick around until tomorrow here in Seoul. Lows will stay in the negative territory at -4 degrees Celsius. Cold winds will make temperatures feel close to -6 degrees. By Sunday, milder conditions along with wide temperature gaps are expected. Heavy snow advisories are in place for mountainous regions of Jeju Island as well as Chungcheongdo and Jeollado provinces. By 9 p.m. tonight, strong wind alerts will be issued for most of the coastlines. For Gangwon-do province, dry weather advisories will be issued as well, so please be extra careful with fires. For Chungcheongdo and Jeollado provinces, heavy snow is in the forecast with up to 10 centimeters in store. The surrounding regions, including Gyeonggi-do and Gyeongsang-do provinces, will see 1 to 5 centimeters. Please be extra careful out on the roads. They will be slippery. Most regions will see frigid spells for the morning hours. Seoul will start off at -4 degrees, Daegu at -1. Rain and snowfall will taper off by the daytime. Highs in Seoul will peak at 7 degrees, Daejeon and Gwangju 9, Busan will reach 12 degrees Celsius. Until early next week, wide temperature gaps of at least 10 degrees are expected. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
11월 28일 세계 박람회 개최지 선정을 위해서 투표를 한다고 합니다. 부산도 열심히 뛰고 있는데요. 응원하는 마음으로 이 공연을 준비하게 되었습니다.
The president also remains committed to boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of this latest.
To discuss the current security environment.
The United Nations' most powerful body on global security, expressing hope.
Stock markets around the world have taken a hit. Speculation that the U.S. Federal Reserve
Arirang.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Hello everyone, it's Friday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. This week has been a very busy one diplomatically as there was a gathering of leaders from the 21 APEC member economies. The highlight was, of course, the Biden-Xi summit that took place at a country estate near San Francisco. There they agreed to resume military communications, but still many disagreements still remain. Meanwhile, the leaders of East Asian countries too have had busy schedules, with President Yoon and his Japanese counterpart Prime Minister Kishida had their 7th summit this year, while Kishida and Chinese leader Xi Jinping too shared their views on the need to revive the relationship. How did experts see this week of APEC leaders' meetings? For this, we have invited Professor Kim Jae-chun, who is also the Dean of the Seoul Graduate School of International Studies. Professor Kim, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here.
Thank you for being with us. And we also have Professor Mason Ritchie from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good to have you with us, Professor Ritchie.
Great, thank you. Happy to be here.
Good evening. Now, first question to our Professor Kim. The highlight of the APEC summit was the Biden-Xi summit, as I said earlier, which was held at the Filoli Estate, California, which is around 40 kilometers away from San Francisco. Before we take a look at the specifics of the summit, could there have been any reasons behind the location being so far away from the city?
That Filoli Estate sort of reminded me of the place that Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev picked for their summit in 1986. That summit was to bring an end to the Cold War order and to sort of reestablish the U.S.-Soviet relations. And the place for the summit was a very remote castle in Iceland, in Reykjavik, Iceland. So this was the place where you can keep a distance from hustle and bustle of the cities. And this was the place where you can have a frank discussion in a relaxed environment. So likewise, Failoli was a private estate, quiet, not really used as a diplomatic before. So by holding the summit in this private and remote estate, I think two leaders wanted to leave an impression that they would have a candid discussion to sort of reestablish their relationship. In addition, China wanted to have this bilateral summit quite earlier than the APEC summit, because they didn't want the summit to be overshadowed by APEC. Because, I mean, if you're holding the bilateral summit in the middle of APEC, it can be overshadowed by APEC and other bilateral summits.
Right, I see. So because the venue was in the remote area, they were able to have candid conversation. Now, Professor Ritchie, before the in-depth talks, Biden said the competition should not turn into conflict, to which she agreed, saying the Earth is big enough for the two countries to succeed. Against what backdrop do you believe the two are seeing the need to cooperate rather than aggravate tension?
Well, in the first place, in the international arena, there are a lot of crises that are at work right now, unfortunately. And, both sides, especially the U.S., I think, is eager not to have an additional crisis with China. And I'm sure China doesn't want to have an additional crisis with the U.S. There are already crises, of varying degrees and with varying impact on the rest of the global sphere. In Ukraine, obviously, with the war being prosecuted by Russia there, in the Middle East, notably, obviously, Israel, but the possibility of spillover into a more region-wide conflict can't be excluded. In the South China Sea, of course, we've seen China and the Philippines confronting each other relatively recently. And then domestically, of course, and probably for Xi and Biden in some ways, this is more important. In the case of China, you have a weakening economy with lower growth prospects going forward. And to some degree, China's in something of a relatively weak position right now. Notably economically, but also on the political side, there are unsettled issues inside of the Chinese Communist Party, which we've seen bubbling up in terms of the very surprising dismissal and even disappearance of, for instance, the foreign minister recently, or the defense minister. And then in the case of the United States, there are upcoming congressional and presidential elections happening in 2024. And so obviously Biden doesn't want to have an additional China crisis as a black mark on a presidency that is already struggling as he looks to go into his re-election campaign.
Right, so both sides did not want to have another crisis because there are so many things to tackle already. And that led to some of the agreements, and one is reopening the military communication channels that Beijing had shut down after then U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in August 2022. Now, Professor Kim, could we say this reopening hints at lowered tension regarding military conflicts?
I think so. One problem with the recent U.S.-China competition was that the competition was taking place without any guardrails. I mean, even before Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan last year, there was a sign that all the important communication channels were being shut down. 2+2 strategic dialogues between foreign ministers and defense ministers of both countries were shut down. And other diplomatic and military channels were shut down as well. So shutting down that hotline after Pelosi's visit was like, to me, it was like a nail in the coffin. now the two leaders agreed to restore the hotline and other working level military dialogues. I think that really means a lot because now they have a channel with which they can communicate and prevent accidental confrontations from escalating into serious flare-ups. So sure, two countries will compete, that's for sure. We all know that the two countries are in for a long and strategic competition for many, many years down the road. But at least they agreed to compete with some guardrails. And I think that's the significance of this summit and significance of restoring military channels.
Right, so it was significant indeed in that the hotline between the leaders were established again. But Professor Ritchie, though they certainly made progress in terms of restoring military communication, the two leaders had differing ideas about export controls. Apparently, she told Biden that investment screening and unilateral sanctions hurt Chinese interests, only to hear that the U.S. has no intention of lifting them. Could we say they could not reach an agreement on economic sanctions?
Yes, I think that's absolutely the case. The United States doesn't seem to be showing any movement or willingness to move on the tech and trade side of U.S.-China confrontation. The fact of the matter is, over the last decade, the United States has moved, in part because of what China has become, towards looking at China as a systemic rival and as a revisionist power in the international system, in the international arena. And that isn't going to change anytime soon without a dramatic ideological change and policy change by China, notably by the Chinese Communist Party. And that's not going to happen either. And there is no appetite right now in Washington for removing or relaxing the securitization of economics, whether that be export controls, whether that be the whether that be the way that the United States looks at intellectual property, whether that be the way that the United States looks at subsidies in China. The fact of the matter is the United States fundamentally believes that China is a systemic rival, is a revisionist power, but also even within the world of economic competition does so in part unfairly. And there's no appetite for the United States to relax that, at least not in Washington, especially as I mentioned earlier, we're going into a 2024 election cycle. I'll also point out, we saw that bubble up when Biden was asked a question by a journalist and referred to Xi as a dictator correctly. But that's what we call a Kinsley gaffe. He told the truth, but just in a setting in which everyone might have expected other leaders not to have said that. The United States and China also didn't seem to make any progress on discussions about artificial intelligence and putting some guardrails on how that's going to be used, notably in a defense and security context. And there were some lead-up discussions, for instance, about nuclear weapons, and we'll have to see where that goes in terms of possibility for arms control. But I have some very, very limited expectations for progress in that area as well.
Right, I see. Well, Professor Kim, another contentious issue they spent a lot of time on was Taiwan. Biden reportedly asked China to respect the electoral process in Taiwan on half of the presidential election set for January. How did you see the discussion between the two over the issue of Taiwan?
Taiwan is one of the thorny issues that separate the two countries. It was reported that China demanded that the U.S. officially declare that the U.S. doesn't support the independence of Taiwan. But to the United States, it was not acceptable because it undermines the U.S. policy for Taiwan, and that policy still is strategic ambiguity. China also demanded that the U.S. should not provide military support to Taiwanese, but this is also against the U.S.-Taiwan Act that provides a legal basis for arms sales to Taiwan. But look, sure, two countries have serious differences over Taiwan, but the simple matter of the fact is that the U.S. doesn't support Taiwan's independence. What the U.S. wants is maintaining status quo. And Taiwan doesn't really want independence either. They want status quo as well. What about China? I don't think China is going to invade Taiwan to annex the island, because doing so could lead to military conflict that President Xi can really handle. I mean, sure, you have to stand tough on Taiwan issue for maybe a domestic political purposes, and it's also a constitutional duty of the CCP. However, invading can be quite costly, so I think there is a tacit agreement between the U.S. and China over Taiwan, but for the reasons that are mostly political, they exchange harsh words. But two leaders, I think, in my personal opinion, understand each other's stance very well, and I don't think they would try to cross that red line.
Right, I see. I mean, though the two countries agreed to cooperate on certain issues, for example, like narcotics, fentanyl and climate change, it seems they need to work more on certain issues like Taiwan and export controls, as our experts have already pointed out. Now, turning to how democratic countries are enhancing their ties to tackle tensions on the Korean Peninsula, the leaders of South Korea, the United States and Japan met, and Biden said he was able to lighten his load thanks to South Korea and Japan. Professor Kim, what would such wars have hinted at?
Well, you have to put it in the perspective of rules-based order, rules-based liberal international order that is in jeopardy now. I mean, in the post-World War II era, the U.S. established and maintained this rules-based liberal international order. But in recent years, this liberal order has been in jeopardy because a number of revisionist countries are trying to revise this international order to their preferences. For instance, Russia is attempting to rewrite the order by waging war in Ukraine, and China is interfering with rules-based order in the Pacific, and North Korea's nuclear threats are also important challenge to the existing order. The Biden administration has worked very hard to safeguard the liberal order, but the U.S. alone cannot deal with the threats to the liberal order in an adequate manner. The U.S. needs support from other liberal countries and allies. And in Asia, the U.S. was in desperate need of cooperation between South Korea and Japan, two important liberal allies, but this was not possible because of historical ill feelings between South Korea and Japan. But now, somehow two countries mended fences, and three countries established a security cooperation body after Camp David summit. So I think it really was a load off the shoulder. I mean, from the perspective of the Biden administration.
Right. So U.S. is seeing Japan and South Korea as great partners in terms of setting and maintaining rules-based order in the international community. Well, Professor Ritchie, many bilateral summits also took place. President Yoon and Kishida had their summit on Thursday local time, where they talked about how bilateral cooperation was deepening with the reactivation of exchanges at multiple levels. Their seventh summit this year. How did you see the talks?
Hey, this is really a continuation of ongoing improved relations between Tokyo and Seoul. There's no new major ground that was broken, but in some sense, that's a good thing, right? That means that they've already been making lots of progress in areas, whether that be security, whether that be defense, whether that be diplomacy, whether that be improved economic ties. And so we are seeing, Seoul and Tokyo, get over the problems of, their own economic clash that was taking place off and on over the last 10 years. On the security and defense front, we're seeing increasing military exercises with Japan participating in exercises, including South Korea. We're seeing ballistic missile defense cooperation, including real-time intelligence sharing on tracking of incoming North Korean missiles. It's worth pointing out that I assume that Yoon and Kishida talked about an upcoming potential trilateral with China as well. That's something that's potentially on the table. Presumably they're trying to set up a way that they can have a sort of united front as they deal with China. And of course, Yoon, Kishida, and Biden also met in a trilateral context. And it's important to remember that a lot of the improved relations between Tokyo and Seoul are coming on the back of the U.S. interest and willingness to advance trilateral cooperation as well. So certainly that was one of the things that was discussed also in the bilateral context between Yoon and Kishida.
All right, I see. Well, staying on Seoul-Tokyo ties, Professor Kim, at Stanford University, the two leaders are expected to announce the hydrogen ammonia global value chain concept on Friday local time as part of efforts to play a role in decarbonizing societies and also to secure the supply chains. What is this about, and in what ways do you believe this could be of help to both of these energy-dependent countries?
South Korea and Japan are still heavily dependent on energy imports, particularly fossil fuels from other countries. And that idea of hydrogen and ammonia global value chain is really for two countries to work together to establish a joint supply network for alternative fuels such as hydrogen and ammonia. I think the idea is still in incipient stage, so we have yet to find out details of the concept and how the concept will translate into policy practices. But the idea is really to raise funds for hydrogen and ammonia projects, joint projects to be more precise, and financial institutions in both countries will support these companies to raise such funds. If the concept is materialized, it could help both countries in terms of diversifying energy sources and decarbonization. The concept is also about keeping the momentum going. I mean, the momentum to restore and advance the relationship between the two countries. And this was what two countries agreed to do since the beginning of this year.
Right. Well, we'll have to wait and see how the details get developed, but I think it is quite significant indeed. Well, Professor Ritchie, Japan and China's leaders also had their summit for the first time in a year on Thursday, where they discussed ways to revive the strategic relationship. What was mainly discussed, and would it be safe to say such meetings would lay the foundations for a trilateral summit between Seoul, Beijing, and Tokyo?
Yeah, so certainly that would have been one of the things that was under discussion. I have no privileged information about what came of that, and I've been busy today and haven't seen any specific reporting, at least, that indicated whether or not this did or didn't help move towards the establishment of a possible trilateral summit. Obviously, this is an important secondary relationship that has soured off and on over the last 10 to 15 years, especially with friction over economics, with friction over security, and any other number of areas. In this particular case, there are, in addition to some of the economic issues that are stumbling blocks in their relationship, there are a number of Japanese businessmen who are being detained in China. And the thought there is that these detentions are likely trumped up and probably not legitimate. So that might have been something that was discussed today and could represent, if they made some progress, a way of getting over some of the problems in the relationship. The other thing, of course, is Fukushima and the Chinese ban on Japanese seafood imports from that area. So that probably was something that was under discussion as well. It's not quite as important overall as getting the U.S. and China on the same page, but putting a floor on relations between Japan and China is excellent for regional security as well.
All right, I see. Well, I'd like to ask many more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Kim and Professor Ritchie, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be next Monday with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the weekend, and goodbye.